genuinely and deeply without a growing sense of mystery and awe. Now keep this picture in mind and consider this. You are a member of the only species on the planet, and for all we know, the only life form in the entire universe that can even contemplate such things. Let that sink in. Think about it. We may be the only ones to look up at the night sky and see a universe of stars, not just random flickers of light. And if we really are alone and looking upward with this profound sense of mystery and awe, isn't that just as mysterious and just as awesome? How can this universe within us, the human mind, contemplate such things? Where did the mind come from? How did that get here? What does it mean? These are the big questions that drive this course. And the key to answering them lies in what I'll argue is the mind's most mysterious and awesome ability of all: language. Language is the most powerful tool on the planet. Think of any product of human civilization. All of it was influenced by language. It was the tool that makes all other tools. It's the ultimate human invention. And this innovation has done more than just build telescopes and computers and satellites, all very impressive. It's possible that without language, the human mind might have never imagined such things in the first place. In this lecture, I'll present a model of the mind that we'll use in the rest of this course, and then I'll talk about how language fits within that model. But first, to set that up, I need to briefly introduce some traditional philosophical views of the mind, and then I'll explain how the study of the mind entered the realm of science. One of the classical models of the mind is dualism, which can be traced back to the ancient Greeks. Dualists saw the mind as two distinct entities. There's a physical part, which includes the body and brain, and there's the non-physical part. For Plato, that was the non-material world of ideas. Later, in traditional religious dualism, the non-physical part was seen as the spiritual soul, and that's how the human body connected to God. By this religious account, when we look upward to the night sky, our body sees the lights, but our soul senses the heavens. You're probably already familiar with the most famous dualist of all, René Descartes. Descartes was a different kind of dualist. He took dualism out of the religious realm and placed it more in the secular world. This type of dualism was called mind-body dualism. The body was a machine, and the mind was the home of thought, reason, and consciousness. The two entities were completely separate, except for where they met in the brain in a structure called the pineal gland. Around the time Descartes was arguing for his mind-body dualism, a rival model of the mind called materialism was gaining popularity. Materialism is most associated with Baruch Spinoza, Thomas Hobbes, and John Locke, and it blurs the distinction between the mind and the body. For these philosophers, mind and body are one and the same. This is a profoundly different view of the mind. For one, materialism removed much of the mystery surrounding the mind by claiming that it could be understood just as the body could be understood. And second, materialists argued that the mind did not have any special properties. It developed just as the body developed. For example, Locke famously argued that the mind is a tabula rasa, or blank slate, at birth, and it takes on meaning only through experience with the world and reflection on that experience. This implies that if you understand the way someone experiences the world, you can understand that person's mind. This move had profound implications. Once the floodgates of materialism were open, it was just a matter of time before the mind became an object of inquiry for scientists, not just philosophers. After all, materialism viewed the contents of the mind as an empirical matter, and the methods of science were perfectly suited for such an investigation. The first scientist to test aspects of the mind in a truly scientific fashion was the German physiologist Wilhelm Wundt. In 1879, Wundt founded the first official laboratory for psychological research at the University of Leipzig, and the field of scientific psychology was born. Wundt's approach to studying the mind became known as structuralism. Briefly, structuralism viewed the conscious mind as composed of smaller building blocks of basic sensations and perceptions. According to Wundt, all conscious experience could be broken down into these smaller units. One way to think about structuralism is it's like chemistry of the mind, with the basic sensations and perceptions acting like the elements in the periodic table. Although structuralism didn't last long as a field of scientific psychology, it had a significant legacy. It brought the study of the mind out of the philosophical armchair and into the scientific laboratory. And it introduced a conceptual approach for understanding complexity at higher levels, such as conscious thought, by reducing it to much smaller units of analysis, such as basic sensations and perceptions. The combination of these two things has had many consequences, but the biggest for this course is that it led to a model of the mind called biological reductionism. Biological reductionism, or just reductionism for short, is materialism on steroids. It not only views aspects of the mind as grounded in the body, it dispenses with the idea of the mind altogether. There is no mind, only a body, only neurons firing or genes expressing, or even further down the reductionist ladder, only particles interacting. This view gained popularity in the 20th century with the incredible advances made in biology, chemistry, and physics. Advances in these fields led many scientists to speculate that human behavior can be totally understood if we describe and understand its basic building blocks. In the 21st century, radical reductionism is still embraced by some scientists, but it hit three major roadblocks in its attempt to understand the complexities of the human mind. First, reductionists cannot agree on what the lowest level is. Should it be neurons, genes, molecules, or quarks, or even mathematical equations? The second problem is that the meaning of something may be lost at finer and finer grains of resolution. Take a painting by the famous pointillist Georges Seurat. Seurat's masterpiece, A Sunday on La Grande Jatte, is housed in the Art Institute of Chicago, and it takes up a whole wall. It's massive, about 7 feet tall by about 10 feet wide. On it are millions and millions of tiny dots of paint. If you zoom in to one of these dots, it's just a single point of color. You get no sense of the overall painting. But when you pull back and view them as a whole, that's where the meaning emerges. To explain a Seurat, it makes no sense to talk only about the tiny parts and ignore the whole. The whole is where the action is. A related third problem is that sometimes the whole goes beyond the sum of its parts. Perhaps you've heard of emergent properties in biology. An emergent property is a characteristic that manifests only in a larger structure or system, but not in its parts. In chemistry, the attribute of saltiness is an emergent property that results from combining the elements of sodium and chlorine. The property of saltiness is not contained in either sodium or chlorine individually. It exists only one level up when the two elements combine. In biology, there are all sorts of examples of emergent properties. Consider heart cells. By itself, each cell does not have the property of pumping blood. The property emerges only at the next level up when the heart cells combine to create an actual heart. This works at higher levels too. Ant colonies operate as a cohesive group, and this behavior goes beyond the properties contained in any one individual ant. Here's a useful way to think of it. The whole of an emergent property is greater than the sum of the parts. Basically, there's a synergy at play. And now we've arrived at the model of the mind that we'll use in this course. The basic principles behind emergent properties offer a new way to think about the mind. If you think of it as an emergent phenomenon, you can see how this might result from a synergistic interaction between the brain, the body, and the environment. The mind is not reducible to any one of these things alone. It exists only through a combination of them. This definition of the mind has all the strengths of the other three models I've presented while not being burdened by their weaknesses. First, drawing from dualism, we can preserve the mind as a special entity without having to commit to a separation from the body. Second, drawing from materialism, we can scientifically study the mind as we study any other thing without committing ourselves to a blank slate. Perhaps aspects of the mind emerge from combining innate attributes of the brain and the body with experience from the environment. Third, drawing from reductionism, we can appreciate the biological and physical building blocks of the mind without viewing them as the only important things. The other levels higher up may be just as significant. Now let's turn to how language fits within this model of the mind. I'll be defining language in much more detail in the next 2 lectures, but for now, I'll introduce it in a way that reveals the powerful impact it has on the mind. Most people think of language as something that's in our heads, like memories or thoughts or emotions. Of course, it is in our heads, but only up to a point. Language also lives in the material world. And from this perspective, you can think of it as you would think of any other physical tool for getting things done. Writing is a perfect example. Someone can have a thought and write it down, and now those words can be used to affect the world. The effects can range from helping you remember to buy a loaf of bread at the store, all the way up to establishing a set of rights for a new democracy. Think of all the ways that the written word has had a massive impact on the world. Religion, law, literature, technology, medicine, the list goes on. Examples like these make it hard to draw a clear line between where language ends in our head and starts in the world. If you're able to see how the written word partly lives outside of us, it's not hard to make the jump to spoken language next. The easiest way to appreciate this is to consider a prehistoric child learning a language before writing existed. To become a fully functioning adult, the child would need to internalize the language of the group. Where is the language that the child is supposed to learn? Is it just in the heads of the individuals of the community? No, it can't be. Language is too complex to be 100% contained in every member of a community. A better way to think of it is that language is distributed across the group, so it must exist at least in part outside the heads of each member. If you can't get your head around this, substitute the word culture for the word language. Can you see that culture does not exist fully complete inside the heads of every member in a community? Language works the same way. Now, does this sound familiar? This is how we talked about the mind. Just like the mind, language may be an emergent property that is the result of a synergistic interaction between brains, bodies, and the environment. One implication of viewing language as something that lives partly outside our heads is that we can more clearly see how language can affect us. If language is similar to other tools